Like to thank you all for joining us today. And today we have a very special guest. We have Pete Lyons, author of many fascinating and visually stunning motorsports books. Pete, thank you so much for joining us today.
Alan, this is going to be a delight. I'm enjoying talking about all this.
Well, outstanding. There's some great stories to tell. There's some great pictures to show. And to lead off, why don't you tell us how you came to be to produce these books? They're filled with great photos. They're great stories. Give us a little bit of your background.
I couldn't find anything that I wanted to do more than what I'm doing right now. I grew up in New York State. My dad was a photographer and an engineer. He worked for the General Electric Company, but in the weekends he would go off to car races and photograph them. So when I was quite young, he started letting me tag along, and he put a camera in my hand and say, "Go shoot that." And he taught me how to pan and to keep the moving car frozen in the frame while the scenery blurs. And he thought I was pretty good at that. And from there, I thought, this is fun. I really like this. And he was writing for Autosport magazine, an English publication. He was their American photographer, only as a weekend gig. And I eventually took over from him, and I became their North American guy, and I went all around. And then finally they moved me to Europe, and I did Formula One in Europe for 4 years. And so I've covered a lot of the world and a lot of different kind of racing series: Formula One, Can-Am, IndyCar. I did a few NASCAR races. I've done a drag race or two. I then also worked for Auto Week, similarly at doing the same kinds of things for many years. I've had stories published in Car and Driver, Road and Track. Those are the big ones. Vintage Motorsport is my current outlet. I do a column called Fast Lines in Vintage Motorsport right now. And then the books have kind of grown out of that.
You didn't just happen upon these photos. You took these photos.
Not all of the photos that you see in these books, no, but I shot a lot of them. Yes, I've got mountains. As you and I were talking before the show began, I've got too many photographs to deal with.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where you're trying to find a specific photograph and you just have too many to find one, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, tell us about your latest book. You've got quite a few of them. I'm going to show that here. There's all kinds of books, something you can find on just about any topic you're interested in. The Riverside International Raceway, quite a storied racetrack. A lot of different kinds of racing took place there. Lotus specific, Can-Am specific, and even make and mark specific. And your latest one is about the Shadow Racing team. Now, this is a legendary team that I think most people know them for their fairly outrageous Can-Am cars, but that wasn't the total story. They were involved in several different kinds of racing.
Yes, it was the creation of a very mysterious fellow named Don Nichols. We can tell a little bit more about him later on, but he left the military after a long career in the U.S. Army. I should preface that by saying that he was a farm boy from Missouri, and he joined the U.S. Army before he was old enough, and he was underage when he signed up for the U.S. Army in World War III. World War III.
Not yet. Not quite yet.
He signed up for the Army while he was underage for World War II in 1943. And he jumped at Normandy in D-Day as a paratrooper. He was one of the first in before dawn. He was a Pathfinder paratrooper, which meant he landed on enemy territory before most of the Allies landed. And his job was to set up signaling devices so that the oncoming waves of cargo planes or troop transports could drop their gliders and their paratroopers at the right place. And so he was wounded immediately on that day, and then he was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium. And then he stayed in the military in the Far East, and he had a kind of an interestingly mysterious past there in the Far East, where he was thought to be a spy for the CIA, and it's something that he liked to cultivate as a mysterious image about himself. So he would never say yes or no, but he would let you think that, well, there must be something to it because he's not denying it. So I don't know the
So,
answer.
so whatever the story was, he was like, well, maybe, yeah.
Something like that. Yes. Well,
But
I did.
there was
Right.
certainly something, some cachet behind it. It was
Right.
all entirely plausible. He wasn't
Right.
just. This is certainly not a case of stolen valor. Don Nichols
He
was a certified, shall I use the term, badass.
yes. There are things that he always said that he wanted to do a book about his military experiences, and he never did it. But he also said that he wanted to do a book about his racing experiences, and he never did it himself, but late in life, a few years before he died, which was a few years ago now, he finally agreed that I could come and sit with him for several days. So my wife and I went up there, and he opened his archive to us up in Salinas. He had what I call the
Oh boy.
wizard's lair, where it was this old steel warehouse just piled to the rafters with everything. He was a pack rat. He would not discard anything, and it was a major effort to get him to sell anything, although people began to do it. Yes, that's myself talking with Don. uh, at that time I was doing the book back in in 2013, 2014 era. And if you notice, he turned up with a blazer with the shadow emblem on it, with a French beret on himself, and he was quite a
He was quite the showman and quite the promoter, from what I
he
understand.
was. He was exactly, yes. That was one of the things about the Shadow team particularly when they went to Europe. They opened eyes by the quality of their presentation. They had they had press hospitality and sponsor hospitality before that Europeans really had caught on to how to do that. So they are still remembered for Don's ability to make a splash. It's unfortunately the cars didn't live up to that. The cars were sniffing on the edge of being successful, but they never quite got there. They did win two different Formula One races, including a World Championship Formula One race right toward the end of their run. But that's as high as they got in Formula One. But
Now,
however, go
you
ahead.
just mentioned that the Shadow team participated in Formula One. Like I said, most people remember them for their Can-Am cars, but
Of
that
course,
wasn't
right?
the extent of their racing. What
No.
forms of racing were they involved in?
Well, if you talk to the Europeans, they are so Formula One centric. That's all they know about. So they heard vaguely that there were Can-Am cars as well, but they're not interested in those.
Right.
There are many. There are many. There are. Sorry, my friends in England and Europe. You are interested too. Um, Don Nichols came back from Japan, having after his military life, he opened a business in Japan where he was importing automotive parts and particularly racing parts and racing tires for the Japanese industry, which in Cold War Japan, in the 50s, they were desperately trying to rebuild and trying to modernize their country. And so Don Nichols was a go-between, getting them technologies and parts and know-how that they didn't have at the time. And so he obviously set his own prices for these things, and he came back with quite a lot of money. And then he had been interested in building a car. He built a car with a Bill Strop, the off-road racer. That he was also involved in the Lincoln program for the Mexican road race, and also the
Mhm.
mobile economy run. And Don Nichols was involved with Bill Strop doing that. And they built a car in Japan for racing in Japan, but I don't think it was ever unveiled or raced. But we do have a photograph of it in the book. This came from Don's own archive and his daughter Penny's archive. Um, but when he came back to California, he hooked up with a guy named Trevor Harris, who was one of the most brilliant geniuses in car design, a real mad scientist. Trevor is a wonderful guy, and he helped enormously with this book. And he and Don Nichols built this tiny tire car. They got Firestone to help them develop a tiny tire car with 10-inch diameter wheels on the front and only 12 on the back. And that
I,
compares to the
be,
15 inches front and rear that most cars had. And it
I
doesn't
believe
sound
this
like
is
much
it.
in inches.
I believe
That's it
that's
at
it right
most
there.
for it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
That is Fearless Fulmer, George Fulmer, driving it at Mosport. That's one of my pictures during the car's debut in 1970, June of 1970. And you can see how he towers in the car compared to the little tiny tires, which of course were done for a low profile, a low body line to improve straight line speed, which it did. That car was the fastest car on the straight at Mosport. This is the hairpin turn at the beginning of the straight down at the bottom of the circuit. It's the one that they call Moss hairpin after Sterling Moss. But that's followed by upwards of a mile of climbing straightaway. And going up that rise, the shadow was in the 190 range, and the
Oh my
McLarens
gosh.
and so on were under 180. So it
Now,
was,
this
yeah.
is basically, they designed basically a go-kart with a monstrous engine and a huge
Yes,
wing in it.
I know the go-kart on steroids, people were calling it, or somebody else called it a skateboard with a Chevy strapped on top. But then, of course, the problem is you come to the end of the straight, and you need the car to do other things than go fast. You needed to stop. That was a problem. You needed to go around the corner. That was a problem. So it wasn't really a successful car, but it made the Shadow name, I think. If they had come up with a completely conventional car, and I don't think people today would know the word Shadow,
Right.
because they're not involved anymore at all. I mean, there's no such thing as a shadow car anymore. So it would have just sunk into history if it was an ordinary car. But the fact that it was so extraordinary looking, I think it created an image in people's minds of, oh, I want to know more about this crazy thing called a shadow. And then as
Now,
time went
most
on,
of us, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is over succeeding seasons, they went away from the experimental thing, and season by season, they became more conventional. But and similarly, at the same time, they became more successful. They got faster and faster, and were leading races occasionally, until finally in 1974 they won the championship in Can-Am. This
Now,
is the
most of us, go ahead.
I'm sorry. This is as they were rolling the car out into the pit lane at Mosport for a practice day. That's Don Nichols in the center with the wing. You can't see his face very well, but he's helping to push the car. And the guy to our left on the outside of the wing, looking forward, is Trevor Harris. He's the designer. And the Japanese guy driving the car is one of the mechanics. He's called Teji. He's one of Don's friends that he made in Japan. He came over to work in the Can-Am car. And I don't have
Now,
the ID of the other guy.
Now this was kind of a mango orange car, kind of sort of close to the McLarens,
Yes,
but most of us know shadow cars for a completely different livery,
that's right.
which
That's
is
right.
something that again speaks to the showmanship. What is that livery, and how did that come about?
It's jet black, and it's glossy black. And the next car started out black. We don't. We've got lots and lots of pictures. I don't know if you've got. Yeah. Okay, that's the championship car, and you see it's completely black. That's actually the winning championship car that Jackie Oliver drove. That. This is a shot I took many years later, back in like 2013, 2014 at Monterey. But this car is on display there. But that's how people now in this country remember the Shadow image. And as you can see, it is a slinky, svelte, beautiful car. It was designed by an English guy named Tony Southgate. The basic chassis was built in England, where Shadow had a Formula One operation, but then the car was finished here in the States and developed in the States, and it won the first four races of 1974 against, let's be honest, minimal opposition. But they did. That's not their fault that they came and nobody else was ready. They did a really good job, and
They
George
beat
Fulmer
everybody
was the
that showed
partner.
up. They beat
Pardon me?
everyone that showed. They beat everyone that showed up.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. So, and that's one of the iconically beautiful cars, the DN4.
Now, it was in all black and had UOP 101 lead free on it.
Yes.
What is the story behind that?
UOP still exists. It is a company based in Chicago, and it is a worldwide mega company in petrochemicals. And the only reason you and I know the name is because for 5 seasons they sponsored these race cars. Before that and after that, they were not involved in racing at all. They don't care whether you, the public, knows about them because you're not their customer. They sell to oil refineries, oil companies. They deal with people who are developing fuels. And remember, petroleum also has many, many other spin-offs, including plastics and medicines and kerosene and so on. So the UOP didn't need the public to know who they were because they build catalytic converters. I'm sorry, catalytic cracking towers around the world. They build them everywhere. There's oil industry. You see gigantic machine, gigantic installations. UOP is involved in designing and building those. So if you're in the Arab oil business or the Southeast Asia oil business or wherever, you deal with UOP, but you and I wouldn't deal with UOP.
But for a short time, they gave Can-Am and motor racing one of the most iconic liveries
Yes.
to this day. And the team themselves, from what I understand, would dress in all black as well.
They had, yes, that's correct. It was part of the Don Nichols idea of making a cohesive team. They weren't the only ones. Penske certainly came into it, but after Don Nichols started, and so on. We're talking about the black cars. After UOP ended its relationship, the cars began to change color as they found different sponsors. So you will find white cars, blue cars, a few more black cars, red and white cars. There was a car that was painted. There's a Dutch tobacco company and the emblem is a lion, and I don't have a picture of it for you here today, but the lion head livery on one of the Formula One cars, to my mind, is one of the all-time spectacular Formula One liveries.
Well, and it just the black cars and that slinky slick look and Don Nichols' penchant for self promotion all added up to something. They were a totally unique set of cars, totally unique individuals, totally unique look, something that made a splash, even though they weren't necessarily the most successful car.
Right. The thing about motor racing is that that they're all working the hardest they can. They've got the best people they can afford to get. And there's always the chance that this next race, they're going to have made the breakthrough. They're going to solve their niggling little problems. This is George Fulmer testing the car before it became short-tailed. This is at Riverside in 1969. And it shows the original configuration of the car as Trevor Harris intended it to be. And you can see now it begins to actually make sense as a low drag machine because the tiny tires allowed like a 24-inch high uh, uh, body line. Literally, it was knee high. If you stood next to it, your kneecap was even with the top of the front fender. But it also had a long tail with the radiators in the back, and it was a bullet on the straight.
Right. Now, we had indicated that Shadow Racing was also involved in Formula One.
Indeed, they in 1973 they branched out and added a Formula One team. This is Tom Price in one of the shadows at Monte Carlo. This is heading down the hill out of the casino hairpin. It's not a hairpin, excuse me. It's this casino turn. There are other hairpins at Monaco, but they raced at Monaco. They raced at George Fulmer 2 years before this, 73, in their first year. Fulmer, their very first race was Kyalami in South Africa, and I had seen them racing in the States, and then I saw them make their debut in South Africa, where George Fulmer had never raced in Africa before. He'd never seen the racetrack. He had never driven a Formula One car. He started the race well in the back, but he kept the thing going, soldiering through. And at the end of the day, he took a point for sixth place. He won a championship point in his very first debut race. And I think people ought to remember that about George Fulmer. And then the very next weekend in Spain, in Barcelona, in the streets of Barcelona, he finished third, and that was a fighting third. He was spent a lot of the race racing with one of the Tyrrells, François Sever's Tyrrell, and he gave him a hard time. This is a later car. It's under restoration. Don Nichols owned this car and was having it restored for auction. But I shot this in the shop where it was being done, and it's the DN8, and it's the car design that Allen and Jones won their single Formula One Grand Prix race in Austria in 1977. And it's the same basic configuration of car, but it's refined. It's got that sleek arrow shape. The pods at the back, either side of the engine, house the radiators. The radiators are mounted fore and aft, so that the air comes in from the outside and blows in toward the engine, then exhausts out the back.
Absolutely amazing. Visually stunning cars. Great story behind the team, and just one of the icons of motor racing.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. This is the same. This is Tom Price in the DN5. This is Monaco '75. That's the one of the turns down below the hairpin. I can't say hairpin. Excuse me. Anyway, it's called Mirabeau. And it was a wonderful shot. You could be up high on a wall, looking over the brink and looking down on this turn. So everybody likes to shoot there. But this shows when the cars still had the UOP sponsorship, but it was there last year, and people were starting to say, the cars are all black. They're kind of hard to see and hard to photograph. They're not showing up on TV very well. And so they came up with these, what they called re-entry colors. And apparently the story is that it was inspired by the colors that a spacecraft or a space capsule makes as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. It's, glows white hot at the front and trails off to more of an orange later down, further down the body side. Whether that's a true story or not, I don't know, but it's part of the shadow lore.
Well, it makes for a good story to tell,
does,
and
right,
yeah,
right.
Which is 99% of promotion, and that was certainly something that the Shadow team did well. Now,
Sorry about my hat here.
Oh, no worries. Now, some of your other books branch out and expand on that a little bit.
Yes.
You have a book about Can-Am, and
Yes.
there were some other very successful teams in Can-Am,
Yes.
and we're showing one right here. Matter of fact, tell us about these cars and what they meant to Can-Am.
These are the Porsche cars, and again, George Fulmer is in this picture. These are the turbocharged Porsches of 1972. It's the Porsche 917/10K, to give it its nomenclature. The Porsche had built streamlined Le Mans cars, coupe bodies with long tails, and then they decided they wanted to build a Can-Am car, and so they made it a Spider version with an open cockpit and a short tail with a gigantic wing on it. But the real technological thing here was the development of turbocharging. If you remember back in the early 70s, turbocharging was around. People were turbocharging it. Indy cars were running turbos, but it did not work well for road racing. It was too much throttle lag. And Porsche and Mark Donohue, who was Penske's driver / engineer, they worked and they solved that problem. And this is the first successful turbocharged road racing car, and it just destroyed the McLarens. It won out of that season. They had, I think, 10 races, and they won 8 of them.
So it was kind of the dominant force in a
yes.
a series that was
right.
Completely over the top.
Yes, right.
While the Shadow cars were over
yes.
the top in their looks and their presentation, the Porsche cars
right.
were over the top in their performance.
Oh, absolutely. They started out with a 5-liter engine turbocharged to about 850 horsepower, and by the end of the season and in the next year, they had gone to 5.4 liters and more boost. And then typically they raced at what they claimed was 1,100 horsepower, but their driver had a knob where he could go up to as much as 1,500 horsepower, which they didn't need to do because that was many hundreds of horsepower over the best that the big block Chevys of the McLarens could do. But I took this picture to show Woody here, Woodward, one of their Penske mechanics. They're ready to change this engine. Just what a monster that engine is! It just is a huge lump of horsepower, and it's a flat 12. It's 6 cylinders out each side. The picture, this is George Fulmer driving the car at Watkins Glen. That's Woody at the lower left there. Roger Penske himself is leaning over the cockpit talking to the driver. And you can see the turbo logs at the top of the engine leading away from the turbos themselves, which are mounted here at the tail of the car. And you can see the two exhaust pipes sticking out the back.
Now, for anybody that hasn't ever been close to one of these cars, pictures do not do these cars justice. They are extraordinarily small with extraordinarily huge tires and a monster engine in them. I remember the first time I saw a 917 Porsche, they look pretty big, and boy, they aren't. They are very, very small cars.
It is. If you see photographs, typically there was an American car, a Detroit car of some sort, pacing these cars, and the photographs show that the big monster Chevy or Ford or whatever it is leading or even a Camaro leading the pack, it dwarfs the cars behind, and yet the cars behind are just cruising. They're wishing they could go faster on the warm-up lap. But the pace car is heeling over. Its tires are howling. Sterling Moss is driving it. He's doing the best he can to give them a pace.
Yeah,
I like the view of this, the angle of the car. It shows the cantilevered rear wing sticking out.
Monster rear wing, and I think at least for folks of a certain age. That I fall into, their first exposure to these cars, because Can-Am wasn't very widely televised. At least in my household, we didn't subscribe to a whole lot of car magazines. But I was aware of these cars, and I have still in my collection both of these cars as slot cars.
Good.
And that's how most people that I know were exposed to this and know these cars from that.
Yes.
Yeah, just absolutely amazing cars, and fantastic names that went along with it. Legends of the sport.
Yes, this is the same event as this is Donnybrook, Minnesota, or what they call Brainerd now. This is Mark Downey, who's sitting in the car. He has just come back from a nasty accident he had. This is his first race back after he damaged his knee and his foot. You wonder if you're looking for a steering wheel. I think that's why he's kind of smiling at me, because he's actually holding the steering wheel with his left hand. Because that car had a detachable steering wheel, which was not really, not every car had that back in those days.
No, and pretty necessary to get in and out of that car as well.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. Now there was a whole nother class of cars in Can-Am, and talking about making a splash and being unique. Let me pull up this picture here, and again, the exposure to most people is through a slot car, and boy, these were pretty popular. Tell us about these and the maker, the cars, and the whole story.
The car is a Chaparral. This is at Road America in 1967. The Chaparrals from Texas, done by Jim Hall and Hap Sharp, and Jim is the driver for this car. The important thing, or probably the most famous thing about the Chaparrals in those days, is the wing. You see the wing that's we only see half of it at the top of the picture. It's mounted on two struts, and you notice the struts go right down in line with the rear wheel, and they are actually mounted on the rear wheel hub carriers. The innovation here is that this downforce goes not through the chassis, but straight into the tires. the benefit of this is if you mount it on the chassis, like cars today have to do by regulation, you have to have strong suspension springs to hold the additional load. In those days, with this Chaparral system, you didn't need that. The springs could be just as subtle and soft and road and compliant to the road as a normal car, but with the addition of with the benefit of additional downforce. That previous shot showed the two of the McLarens that had copied the idea, except that they did not have the Chaparral's flipper wing. The previous shot that showed the guy looking in the back of it is Bruce McLaren, who's the head of the McLaren team and a two-time Can-Am winner. And he hasn't seen this car this is the opening race of the season. So, and unlike today, there was no reason why Bruce couldn't wander up and have a quiet peek inside of how they did all this stuff. And it was sometime after that the McLaren came up with a similar idea on their car.
Fancy that. Now, the Chaparral innovations in
Yes.
Can-Am, which was kind of just wide open. It's run what you
was.
brung, whatever you want to do. They
is.
came up with some innovative ideas.
I know the Can-Am was a marvelous thing because it was the rule book was so thin. As long as it was a sports car, meaning it had two seats and the fenders over the wheels, pretty much anything else was fair game. You could do whatever you wanted to. This is probably the Chaparral that did not work at all. This is the 1969 2H. The whole idea was just as Shadow was doing in the same year, they were trying to go for very high speed on the straightaway. The whole idea was it was a low drag car built like a missile, and it had a little wing out the back. And you notice that you can see the driver, who is John Surtees, a former world champion, not only on cars and on motorcycles, but also he was a Can-Am champion. But by 1969, he had signed to drive for Jim Hall in the Chaparral. You notice you can see a window in the door looking at his steering wheel and his arms. Originally, that was going to be the side window so that the driver could see out, because Jim Hall's original idea was to cut drag even further by dropping the driver several inches down below the top of the body line and having it a coupe top. There would be a gigantic piece of plastic over him, but level with the body. And the idea was it would be a streamlined super coupe where you could look out over your toes and you could look out sideways with your through the window. That leaves the problem of actually seeing past the front wheels. If you think of a car with a big thick A-pillar, there's a blind spot for you, and this one had a monster blind spot. So Jim Hall said, "No, that's no problem," and he rigged up a pair of periscopes in the side, so that it could show like trucker mirrors, but two of them, so he could see forward. And John Surtees came to the factory, looked at it, he says, "No, I'm not going to drive that thing." He demanded that they cut a hole. Yeah, he demanded they leave the top off and sit him up to drive it properly. He wasn't going to drive that contraption. And Jim Hall was always annoyed by that. He still thinks that it would have been a successful car.
Well, and speaking of innovations in Chaparral, it's hard to mention the make without mentioning this car.
Right. This was the final Can-Am Chaparral, 1970. They had gone from the low drag, consequently low downforce car that did not work to the absolute opposite. This is a very, very high downforce car. You see the two fans at the back. Those are actually military surplus tank air cooling fans mounted at the back of the car to extract air from underneath the car. And I wish I had a pointer here, but under the sides of the bodywork, particularly at the back where the square back is, you can see that there are, or you could be able to see skirts. They are GE Lexan plastic material hanging down, and they're like a quarter inch or a half inch clear of the road, and they are seals. It's exactly like a suction cup. The fans generated suction inside the car, which clamped the car to the road. And it did dramatically increase tire adhesion, just exactly like the Chaparral wings had done. but this was applied through the suspension, and it affected the whole car, and the download was incredible.
Now, I have a picture here. Let me find that. Those fans didn't run on their own.
Good point. I'm glad you raised that. I was trying to figure out how to say that without making it too long. This is the snowmobile engine, which is driving the fans. It's a 2-cylinder, 2-stroke engine made for snowmobiles by Austria, and a company in Austria called Hilo, JLO. And you can see the 2 exhausts sticking out to the upper left. You can imagine the racket that made. To the left, we can see one of the 2 fans. And the snowmobile engine had about 70 horsepower, and it was fuel injected and so on. And they drove the fans with that, and it sat on top of the gearbox. And the engine, of course, was the main big Chevy engine, the 465 Chevy, and you can see the giant exhaust pipes for that engine. And so this was a 2-engined Can-Am car.
Wow.
It's not something that you expect to see in other kinds of racing. You wouldn't expect to build a Formula One car with 2 engines because it's not allowed. But the Can-Am rules didn't prohibit it. If you want 2 engines, fine. There was a car that had 4 engines one day. It didn't work very well, but they had it.
But you got to try it. You never know. You might end up in first place.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So now, to bring up another team, actually, I think we have a couple more Chaparral pictures here.
Right.
Let's see.
The first Chaparral, yes. That's the 1966 first generation Chaparral with the wing. It's the debut race. It was really fast. It was on pole. That's in the race. That shows Phil Hill, world champion driving and many-time Le Mans winner, driving for Chaparral. This is coming down the first turn at the old Bridgehampton racetrack. You see the car is rounder than the later generations of Chaparral, and it has the wing not white now, but it's dark blue on struts. But you can see the struts loaded the rear tires completely. That's Bruce McLaren and a McLaren right behind him, and that car just ran away from the McLarens, and it was. Sobering to Bruce McLaren because he had been used to dominating sports car racing in North America with those little McLarens. But when he came to the Can-Am, he thought it would be more of the same. But then he was amazed at how much more competitive it was now that it had big money behind it. This is Phil Hill and the Chaparral at the same event.
Absolutely amazing photos. Just great history. Great cars, and here we see the small Cox COX.
Oh yes,
sponsorship from a model airplane and model company, which
that's right. Yes.
Tied right into putting these models of these cars into hands of little urchins like me, who then quickly became motorsports obsessed.
Good for Cox. Good for you. I'm glad it worked. Yes.
Yeah.
There was a lot more to the Chaparral too. Of course, the famous thing is everybody thinks it has an automatic transmission. In fact, it has a torque converter transmission. It's a clutchless transmission. The driver still changes gear with a gear lever, but he doesn't have a clutch pedal. And the fact that he doesn't have a clutch pedal frees up the left-hand foot pedal to be a wing adjustment pedal. The driver could push down on the pedal and it would flip the wing horizontally for high speed on the straights, and then he move his left foot onto the center-mounted brake pedal, and that would allow the wing to flip back up in its high drag, high downforce configuration to go into the turn. This is Bruce McLaren wearing Oscar Kowaleski's helmet, and Oscar was a prankster, and he put a wing on his own helmet to help his track performance.
Speaking of adjusting the wing.
Right.
And
And
here you can see a normal sized car leading a pack of Can-Am cars, like we'd mentioned earlier.
right, that's the picture I was thinking of. This is the 65 race at I'm sorry, I keep saying these things wrong. 67 Can-Am Elkhart Lake season opener that year. That's Sterling Moss driving in the Camaro pace car, and it's a tricked up Camaro. Incidentally, I'd learned later it's a show car, and it still exists. The owner has contacted me, and he wanted photographs of this car. I didn't know at the time. I thought to me it was a Camaro, but it's a trick Camaro, and Sterling Moss drove it at the pace car as a pace car at Road America, and he's going pretty darn briskly, and the Can-Am cars behind him are just trundling around, wishing he'd get the heck out of their way. You see the 5 rows back, we see the Chaparral, who it wasn't as quick in this debut event as it would be later in the season. It was significantly quicker later on in the series. That's Bruce and Denny at the front, in that yellow ochre McLaren car. I'm sorry, the tangerine. You see, I wish I could write all this because I can fix it. Sorry, this is the papaya color is what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha.
It's the color of papaya fruit, and I can prove that. I had a papaya salad one day, and a guy who lives near us and has an actual paint chip of that McLaren color in his wallet at all times. 50 years later, and he pulled it out, and we compared it to the color of the papaya fruit in our salad. It's the identical color. The McLarens were painted papaya, people. It's true. And anyway, Denny Holm was in car 5, and Bruce McLaren drove car 4. And that was the year that they just began the Bruce and Denny show, dominating the Can-Am.
Yeah.
And that's the Chaparral, right? That's Jim Hall's Chaparral right behind them.
Yep, and again, another storied make that was people associate with Can-Am is McLaren.
Yes, it really McLaren made the Can-Am. This is Peter Revson driving McLaren to his championship in 1971. He is the first American driver to win the Can-Am championship. He took over from after Bruce McLaren was killed, and then so they needed another driver, and there's more to that story. But basically, Peter Revson was their team driver in 71 and again in 72. Brilliant driver, taken far too early, just as Bruce was. And this is the same car, and this is what I would look like a few minutes later after I shot this picture. This is at Riverside before the final race of the 71 season. That's Revson giving rides to people. And because it was a sports car, folks, thanks to the SCCA demanding that it look like a sports car and be presented as a sports car, it had at least space for a passenger to sit in there. There was no seat. There were no seat belts. It was very narrow and pinched. You had to keep your right arm away from the driver so you wouldn't interfere with the steering wheel at work. And you couldn't put your feet down in this footwell without crossing your ankles. So it was not a comfortable sports car, but by gosh, what a ride that was. Alan, that remains the single most incredible 5 minutes of my entire motorsports career, my ride with Peter Revson and the McLaren at Riverside.
Oh my gosh, that's what people wouldn't give to have that experience.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
And just to hear those trumpets behind you.
Yes, that's the noise you heard. You didn't hear the exhaust so much as you heard the trumpets. It's kind of a rattling sound. I don't want to make an unpleasant noise here on the video, but it was like a blubbering with your tongue noise. Not you knew it was powerful, but it didn't have that crack of an exhaust. It was a more flubbery sound.
Interesting. Absolutely amazing. Well, that is quite the stories. And if anybody wants to see those and read those stories, they can pick up your books, which are phenomenal. We actually have one more picture here of the intakes, which are very cool.
We're blank.
No, hello.
it's
hello.
Oh,
Showing the the intakes.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any image at all here.
Okay. Well, we'll switch back here.
Alan, can you go back to one of the early slides that showed the range of books and the calendar that we also sell?
Maybe. Let's see if I can find that. I've got that
very
up on the
early in the
screen.
sequence.
Got that up on the screen now. Your video has gone blank, as sometimes is wont to happen in these things.
Okay.
So let's see. But I do have the calendar and book images up now. We're seeing the Shadow, Lotus, Riverside, Velocity, Fast Lines, Ferrari, A Man and His Machines, and the complete book of Lamborghini.
Yes, those are the 6 of my books. I've done a total of 19 books to date. Those are the 6 that we currently have in stock and still available. Those 6 books plus the calendar, the 1971 season calendar, which is new for 2021, 50-year anniversary of the K&M. And if the folks will go to my website, PeteLyons.com, we have all of those available, and they come at the normal price that people would pay elsewhere, but they get my signature. So
outstanding!
If they want that, I'd be delighted to add it to it.
Oh, that would be fantastic. You couldn't do much better than that to have a signed copy. And the photographs are amazing. The stories, like we've heard, are just phenomenal. And I highly encourage everyone to go to PeteLyons.com and pick those up. Pete, we can't see you, but we can see your books. But I think that is as good a sign as any that we should wrap this up.
We're done.
And yeah. But Pete, thank you so much for talking with us today. Very educational, amazing imagery, and what a privilege to have been able to not only be at these events and have these experiences, but be able to capture them to share with other people. Well,
Alan, it's been a delight talking with you. I always love to talk about this stuff. It's been my life, and I'm as enthusiastic about it today as I was when I was 12 years old.
Well, outstanding. That you can't ask for much more than that, as to be able to do what you want, what you favor in life, and be able to share it with others and still enjoy it throughout your life. So everyone, please go to PeteLyons.com, order your favorite book or calendar there, request a signature from Pete, and you will have your very own signed copy of these fabulous books to enjoy at home. Pete, thank you once again so much for being with us today.
Alan, I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
All righty, thank you, and goodbye all. We'll see you at the next interview.